Virginia's Shenandoah Valley is an absolutely beautiful region with mountainous vistas, lush forests, and sweeping fields in abundance. The valley is also ripe with promise for the curious rail fan, whether it be the Shenandoah Valley Railroad, Buckingham Branch, or Virginia Scenic. Another attraction was added to that list in the fall of 2023 as the Virginia Museum of Transportation, Buckingham Branch Railroad, and their Virginia Scenic Railway teamed up to put on 5 weekends of fall foliage excursions through the valley, led by Norfolk & Western's J-Class steam locomotive number 611, commanding attention as she navigated over the mountains and through the valleys of the Buckingham Branch. The Queen of Steam had begun a new era of rule in the Old Dominion. It's Friday, November 3rd, 2023, and I arrived in Goshen, Virginia, kicking off 2 days' worth of chasing 611. As she prepared for the day ahead, the Queen made her location clear, with plumes of steam rising high into the sky on this 20-degree Virginia morning. Passengers were boarding the Virginia Scenic's Shenandoah Valley Limited at the newly built Victoria Station, constructed parallel to the Buckingham Branch's Goshen Industrial Track that splits off the main at Goshen Junction. As departure closed in, I moved up to the junction in order to watch as the excursion shoved out of Victoria and onto the old Chesapeake and Ohio main line. These reverse moves were led by 2 Buckingham Branch GP40-2s, which were kept on the west end of the consist for the entirety of my chase. Approximately 20 minutes after 9 a.m. and the Limited was on the move, where I was about to see 611 under steam for the first time. I could not have been more excited. Departing at 9 a.m. and 2:30 p.m. Friday through Sunday, the Shenandoah Valley Limited ran all 4 weekends in October as well as the 1st of November. The trip totaled about 68 miles round trip from Victoria Station to Stanton and return. Moving east, the ride takes passengers and rail fans through the beautiful George Washington National Forest, capped off by cresting the summit of North Mountain. From the summit, the train will drop into the beautiful Shenandoah Valley, passing through Swope and Hebron prior to Stanton. These runs are as close as 611 has come to mainline operation since 2017, as the BB's track speed gets up to 60 miles an hour and sees routine Amtrak and CSX run-throughs. Because both Goshen and Stanton lack proper turning facilities, the 611 would face east for the entirety of its season on the BB, meaning the railroad had assigned 2 diesels on the west end in order to lead the excursions back to Goshen. This also meant that 611 had to shove its train railroad west off the Goshen Industrial Track and onto the main line, which provided my first run-by of the Queen herself. What an absolutely incredible sight. Norfolk & Western 611 is a 484 Northern type J-Class steam locomotive built by the railroad in 1950 at their Roanoke shops. N&W's 14 J's were the most powerful passenger Northerns ever built, with 70-inch driving wheels, 80,000 pounds of tractive effort, and 5,100 horsepower. They are also among the most elegant of steam locomotives, with the trademark streamlined aesthetic intended to boost ridership and enhance the train's overall image. I find it really cool how railroads built locomotives in-house, bragging rights that hardly exist in the 21st century. All things considered, it is easy to understand why the sole surviving Northern J has been dubbed the Queen of Steam, and any doubts are quickly reassured by one of her many bone-chilling run-bys. The J is utterly massive, and was to put on a show of proportionate brilliance. The cold morning promised impressive plumage from 611 as she was heard thundering up the main well before coming into view. Sensory overload is an understatement. Words cannot describe the thrill of 611 speeding by oneself for the first time, a thrill that never got old. After following the restoration effort, seeing the engine on static display in Strasbourg, and traveling up to Virginia to see her in action, it felt surreal to finally watch the J tear past me. It was a wonderful morning in the western Virginia Blue Ridge Mountains, especially since I was chasing the Limited. 611's Railfan Caravan had me a little worried about the difficulty of outpacing the train, although my nerves were quickly calmed by the beautiful mountain scenery. I was ahead of the train before I knew it, and landed in Craigsville with just enough time. It might not seem like it, but the steam engine was preparing to sharply decrease speed for a 5-mile-an-hour slow order east of town. This provided railfans with an excellent chance to get well ahead of the train, as both the tracks and road begin the climb up North Mountain. There are numerous eligible photo locations on the climb uphill. Honestly, there are numerous eligible locations at any point along the route. The next one I chose was at Control Point North Mountain, accessed by parking on the side of the road and walking down a short trail to the tracks. North Mountain is the summit of the ruling 1.5% eastbound grade and was quite the money shot as the 484 crested the visibly steep hill. Seeing the grade at North Mountain, one might be wondering how a CSX road train manages to conquer the hill. The Class 1 runs east and west through Virginia bidirectionally via 2 C&O main lines, with empty unit trains out of Richmond traveling along the aggressively profiled BB, while all others take a more gentle route via the James River and Rivanna subdivisions. These hills are no problem for Buckingham Branch Freight's, Amtrak's Cardinal, or the Shen Valley Limited, as the train sails up and over the summit. With the 1.5% grade up North Mountain behind it, the J has now left the George Washington National Forest and entered the Shenandoah Valley. The valley is characterized by the rolling hills of Swope and Hebron, with the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains rising in the background. 611 is the only remaining locomotive of N&W's J class, and is the 6th steam locomotive I've had the pleasure of seeing in action. She's also easily the largest, and the first streamliner I'd seen. Prior to my trip, I wasn't as crazy about the streamlined design as most, as I tend to favor the traditional industrial look of a steam locomotive over the sleek design. I was still very much excited to chase the J, and my opinions on the streamline were quickly and easily flipped. This elegant design was applied to a limited number of locomotives towards the end of the steam era, and remains on even fewer in 2023. To my knowledge, the only other operating streamlined steamers on the continent are Southern Pacific's Northern number 4449 and CPKC's Royal Hudson number 2816. The CPKC rides on a 4/6/4 Hudson wheel arrangement, with the railroad dubbing the streamlined prototypes Royal in order to recognize their sleek design after one had pulled King George VI across Canada unassisted. While 2816 is scheduled for a system-wide tour in 2024, the Daylight has been relegated to a small museum property in the Pacific Northwest, objectively making Norfolk and Western 611 the most attractive steam locomotive currently in operation. Don't tell the Reading and Northern I said that. This locomotive is an absolute beauty, and I was delighted to be chasing her through equally breathtaking scenery for the weekend. Watching 611 snake through the Shenandoah Valley was a treat in a league of its own, and I knew for sure I'd been bitten by the bug. I'd rail-fanned the valley back in February of the same year, having chased Buckingham Branch and CSX freights in between Goshen and Stanton for the day. This gave me some personal insight as to which locations I wanted to see 611 at, the most imperative of which was this field in Hebron. This spot was a favorite of mine in February and again in November, and I was quite pleased to have made it with enough time to light up the drone. From Hebron, the Shenandoah Valley Limited was quick to pull into the station in Stanton, at which point the two EMDs would take over for the trip west to Goshen. Most of 611's posse had followed her into Stanton, although I was perfectly happy sitting tight in anticipation for the return trip. After turning the car around and getting an apple in my system, the low drone of EMD 645s echoed through the air 13 minutes after the train had passed on the way east. Chasing the westbound run was to be much more relaxed than the eastbound. While I had no problem keeping a level head on the way east, my defensive driving skills proved quite useful, but were not immediately needed with the diesels now up front. Personally, a harebrained chase is a quick way to suck the fun out of any railfan outing, so I stuck with my usual quality over quantity method of operations. I did my homework and established a plan to see 611 through as many desirable locations as possible over the course of the 4 trips I was to chase her. That plan only included a couple of shots on the westbound run, so I was more or less along for the ride as both the Shenandoah Valley Limited and I made our way back to Victoria Station. The slow order east of Craigsville proved useful again, in place due to tight clearance on the bridge over Lehigh Road and the Little Calf Pasture River. The 3 locomotives had their train back up to speed by the time they were in town, and the crew of 611 had some celebratory whistle blasts to share with the crowd after successfully navigating the bridge once again. It was certainly a beautiful day for a train chase. A cloudless sky and great subject kept a smile on my face, which remained as I pulled up to the fields east of Goshen's Calf Pasture River for another drone video. This fall was the first occasion that 611 had operated mainline excursions since 2017, when she was named the official steam locomotive of Virginia and celebrated with 2 different runs over Memorial Day weekend. The spirit of Roanoke, as painted on the cab, had arrived on the Buckingham branch just over 6 years later, leaving home in her namesake city and running up Norfolk Southern's Roanoke district to the BB interchange at Waynesboro. From the interchange, it was about another 48 miles west along BB trackage into Victoria Station, a fitting castle for the Queen, as she would spend the next 7 weekends in Goshen for preparation, an employee special run, and of course 5 weekends of Shenandoah Valley Limiteds. The Virginia Museum of Transportation had brought the 611 up to the Buckingham branch in order to celebrate the fall colors returning to the Shenandoah Valley. By the time of my visit, the colors had passed their peak, albeit still more plentiful than I'm used to. Some spots had more color than others, such as the Maury River Road crossing over the Goshen Industrial Track. This meant 611 was back up front for a short lumber into the station after peeling off the main. Barring a mechanical issue and therefore diesel replacements on 2 runs of the Limited, 611 completed 28 Shenandoah Valley Limited runs over the course of her 5-week season on the Buckingham branch. She averaged a consumption of more than 19 tons of coal each run, or over 6 tons an hour, a true testament to her insatiable hunger for power. Keeping that hunger at bay was around 19,000 gallons of water per trip, which helped to cool the 611's many components that produce her 5,100 horsepower. It was 1 p.m. by the time 611 had pulled her train into Victoria Station, which meant there was an hour and a half before the next trip was to depart. I decided to use that time to scout locations along the main line, primarily spots I couldn't get to this morning that I wanted to confirm were up to snuff. That brought me to the Shenandoah Gun Club at the exact time that Amtrak's tri-weekly eastbound Cardinal was passing through. Amtrak Train 50 was the first instance I'd seen one of the company's new Siemens Chargers, kind of bulky locomotives, but their color palette is refreshing. The Cardinal passed the Gun Club at 2:06 p.m., which meant I barely had enough time to get set up in Goshen for the afternoon departure of the Virginia Scenic Railway. The VSR is essentially the passenger division of the Buckingham Branch Railroad, whose rolling stock and motive power made up the majority of the Shenandoah Valley Limited's consist. Buckingham Branch locomotives number 7 and 13 are both GP40-2s, built for the DNR-GW and Milwaukee Road respectively. Today's train is a melting pot of heritage, with passenger cars off the Chicago, Burlington and Quincy, Illinois Central, Penn Central, Pennsylvania Railroad, San Luis and Rio Grande, the Southern, 3 museum-owned bi-levels, and my favorite, the Norfolk and Western Powhatan Arrow. The star of the show was, of course, the J, with her tool car, 25,000-gallon water tender, and 35-ton capacity coal tender. As I said before, the Queen used roughly 19 tons of coal each trip. To put that in perspective, her coal tender can hold nearly twice that amount. Imagine having to refill that massive tender after every day of operation. It's incredible. She wasn't rolling coal quite yet, as exiting the siding and entering the main meant that the entire train must be on mainline metal before the siding's slow speed limit could be left in the dust. One thing I really enjoyed about this spot in Goshen is the main line's super elevated curve. Although the fall foliage train wasn't going fast enough to necessitate the clever engineering, it looked quite good leaning into the winter afternoon sunlight. You can tell the engineer begins to open the throttle as the end of the train approaches, meaning they are now fully on the main line and can highball into Stanton. And highball they did. From Goshen, I intended to beat the train to a shot just west of Craigsville, although was so excited I forgot to press record on the camcorder. Oh well, at least I made it to Esteline Valley Road with enough time, as the Queen was absolutely thundering out of her slow order over the Little Calf Pasture River. The J is in a weight class all her own at 494,000 pounds. When combined with her coal tender, she tips the scales at over 872,000. Up until the last weekend of October, she carried her own on the eastbound run, but after a loose stay-bolt was discovered upon shakedown inspections on the 27th, the 611 was sidelined. Repaired in time for the runs on the 29th, the diesels stuck with the train from then on out. This meant 611 now had help up North Mountain, completing the climb quicker than she had in weeks past, and that I had less time than anticipated to beat the train over the summit and into the valley. Good planning and good luck never fail though, and I managed to make it work as I landed back at the gun club only a couple minutes before the Queen did the same. The BB dispatcher had put the barely visible westbound Cardinal in the hole at North Mountain, making for perhaps the first and last time I will watch Amtrak take a siding while a steam-powered excursion holds the main. I truly didn't think a scenario like this would play out before my eyes in 2023, but everything about 611's reign over the Shenandoah Valley proves one should never say never. The locomotive sounded great as it gave us rail fans, Amtrak passengers, and her own quite a show, affording a chance to catch her breath as she put the North Mountain grade behind herself. After getting caught at the Hewitt Road crossing, I had exactly 6 seconds to spare in the cornfields east of Hebron as the train barreled into Stanton. The tripod was ditched in the field behind me, and the shaky camera proves evidence that I was breathing heavy after sprinting from the car. All day, I had been getting a chuckle out of how extensive the crowd following the train was. Everywhere she went, dozens of rail fans were bound to follow suit. Being one of those rail fans, I had set up back in Swope for the evening's westbound trip, passing through 38 minutes after the cornfield at Hebron. From Swope, I leapfrogged back to that blasted hill, wanting to at least capture the diesels in the golden light. I got set up well ahead of the train and had a chance to take in the pure tranquility of my surroundings. Life looked pretty peaceful for the local residents. I sure am jealous of their upfront seats to the BB main line. You'll notice that the hill west of Craigsville, much like the rest of the Limited's route, has old code line wire running alongside the tracks. While oftentimes trackside poles and wires are a pain to photographers, I found these to provide a great addition to shooting along the BB, not to mention a nice addition to the time capsule excursions. From Craigsville, I landed alongside the Calf Pasture River in Goshen, looking up towards the main line. I'm only about a fourth a mile west from where I watched this morning's trip return through the field, as I eagerly watched engine number 7 leaning into the bridge's super elevated curve. As if chasing 611 wasn't cool enough, let us not forget that it was being done on an active freight and passenger main line. There had been a CSX westbound empty grain train dogging the excursion out of Stanton, coming through Goshen as soon as 611 cleared the main. These empties will rejoin the other C&O main line in Clifton Forge, where Buckingham Branch trackage ends and CSX continues into West Virginia. Similar to this afternoon's instance at the Gun Club, I was pleasantly surprised to be watching CSX road trains run in tandem with a steam-powered excursion. Never thought I'd get to say that. I had wanted to use this opportunity to hopefully watch the Grainer and excursion pass each other at the junction, but couldn't pass up the golden lighting shining down on the industrial track. 4 minutes after the empties had disappeared from my drone's view, the 611 entered it, as the sun was quickly setting behind the Virginia Blue Ridge Mountains. It was a nail-biter as to whether or not we'd have beautiful golden lighting or darkness here in Goshen, but I could not be happier with how well things came together. fire in the sky held off just long enough and made for one of the coolest shots I think I got of the weekend. The Queen of Steam is the largest locomotive I've seen at a length of 109 feet and 2 inches, standing 16 feet off the railhead and equipped with her iconic Hancock Long Bell 3-chime whistle. Norfolk & Western 611 had been an incredible thrill to chase along the BB's main line. The short line had done just as incredible a job of preparing for the occasion, with the construction of Victoria Station complete with a gift shop, food trucks, ample parking, and isolation from the Goshen Spur should freight operations need to be conducted. It was very exciting and refreshing to see a tourist venture of this magnitude taking place, and I can think of few better locations for it than the wonderful Shenandoah Valley. Victoria Station appears to be by no means a temporary setup, which makes me hopeful that the VSR is going to continue to operate programs like the SVL out of Goshen well into the future. If said programs were to be in conjunction with the VMT, well, that would simply be amazing. But for now, the sun was setting on a fun day one in the Shenandoah Valley. I was over the moon with the day's results and excited to do it all again in about 14 hours. Saturday morning began in a slightly different manner than Friday, waking up in Stanton and setting out towards the Shenandoah Valley Railroad's locomotive shops. I specifically wanted to see the Western Maryland locomotives with the sunrise in the background, and wound up getting just that. I've always thought that WM painted their locomotives in remarkable schemes, and couldn't pass up the opportunity to take a look for myself while in the area. Owned by Stanton-based Precision Locomotive Services, SD40-2s number 7436 and 7471 had been posed out front while they lay over at the SVRR shops awaiting their next assignment. They had most recently served on the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad in conjunction with Mallet number 1309, and I'm excitedly waiting to hear what the future has in store. Aside from the WM locomotives, the SVRR is home to a neat collection of ALCOs and EMDs, all in various operational states, but mostly visible from public property. Owned by the same parent company of Cass Scenic Railroad, the SVRR is right next door to the Buckingham branch and sees frequent interchange with the neighboring short line. From the Shenandoah Valley shops, I had another beautiful drive through the mountains, bound once again for the hamlet of Goshen. It appeared as if I had beat the heat to town. The trackside grass was still thoroughly iced over from the night before. Not all was cold at Victoria Station, as VMT's amazing crew of employees and volunteers prepared the train for its next 2 runs. 9 a.m. was quick to arrive, as the BB's trademark chevron stripes gleamed in the winter's morning sun. It was frigid outside, but I bet the cab of 611 was quite the sauna. As with the previous morning, I was hoping for some exciting plumage and was well rewarded as the air temperature stayed low just long enough for the Shenandoah Valley Limited to rocket out of town. Built to operate high-speed passenger trains and having the honor of pulling President Eisenhower, it was amazing to see 611 stretching her legs on the Buckingham branch. The hair on my arms stood up time and time again as she sailed by me, with flashes of black and Tuscan red, followed closely by a storm of steam. The passengers were in for a real treat riding behind 611, but the rail fans were as well. I was very much looking forward to another full day of chasing the Queen. Knowing that it was now the weekend, and the last weekend 611 would be operating, I had figured the chase party would be much larger than the previous days. I wasn't expecting to get too many run-bys today for just that reason, as I barely made progress in catching up to the excursion. Those efforts were made harder when I caught up to the Pacers, clogging up the curvy two-lane mountain road with not much legal opportunity to pass them. I put the camera on the dashboard and figured if I was going to be caught up in the mess, I may as well enjoy it. Enjoying the opportunity was easier said than done, as there was some very poor driving behavior on display by the Pacers west of Craigsville. I made good use of the dotted yellow lines and advanced when I had the opportunity, but had to dodge in between the Pacers in order to safely allow some westbound traffic passage. It was definitely super cool to drive alongside the J, an experience only had out of necessity though, as it is clearly dangerous and selfish. Luckily, the county sheriffs thought the same and were happy to share their opinion in the form of a ticket with the line of Pacers I left behind me. There was no skin off my back though, as I made it to my next location with plenty of time. This is Schillings Trail, one of many roadside hunting trails that cross the tracks. I had noted from the previous day how the fall foliage appeared to be quite vibrant at Schillings, not to mention how much I love a quick hike to find some tracks. Once set up, the serenity of Schillings set in as the J can be heard stomping up the mountain. Hebron, the Goshen Industrial Track, and now Schillings were on the list of favorites so far. Schillings is on the grade west of the summit at North Mountain, which meant the diesels had also been working in order to help 611 maintain a good speed. Thankfully, the Queen was reined in on her descent into the valley, which allowed me more time than I expected to get set up once again in Hebron. Doing this meant I was not going to be able to see the train in Stanton, although I was completely okay with that. I was far more interested in watching the Limited cut through the rolling farmland of the valley and playing it cautious in order to not be outrun by the Queen due to the massive amount of suitors giving chase. While track speed on the BB is 50 to 60 miles an hour, the Shenandoah Valley Limited was keeping somewhere between 30 and 40. This disappointed some, as the thought of 611 doing track speed was invigorating, but 40 miles an hour was plenty fast for me. That, and I highly doubt chasing would have been possible if the crew let her go much faster. As with both runs on Friday, there was some nice downtime in between the excursion's eastbound passage through Hebron and its westbound. I followed some new friends to a spot on Hewitt Road west of the grade crossing in Swope, which was to provide another nice aerial pacing opportunity, as well as a window into the past as to what steam engines and code lines must have looked like. From Swope, I doubled back to Craigsville in order to get the 611 going through her slow order. The tracks shoot over the Little Calf Pasture River and Lehigh Road by way of a bridge span that allows 2.75 inches clearance on either side of the giant J. With a stance of 11 feet and 2 inches breadth, the J-Class locomotive is about 6 inches wider on each side when compared to conventional rolling stock, hanging over either side of the rail nearly as much as the track gauge is wide. With such tight clearance, the 611 is brought down to 5 miles an hour for every crossing in order to mitigate as much wobbling as possible. Time and time again, this bridge had proven to be a lifesaver. No matter how congested things got west of Craigsville, I knew the slow order would allow me to leapfrog the train and get almost anywhere with enough time. I had not been proven wrong so far, and the good record continued thanks to the Lehigh Road Bridge. The crew wasn't messing around either, getting the train down to 5 right as the J approached the bridge span. I suppose after 25 scheduled runs, the crew has this crossing down to a science, quickly advancing the throttle on 611 after she was back on terra firma. Making use of the slow order, I was able to beat the train to Bells Valley, about 4.5 miles out from Goshen Junction. I had been eyeing this shot across the field and figured it would work well with the westbound run. After all, who am I to turn down an opportunity to see 3 of my favorite things when chasing a train: a steam engine, open field, and mountainous backdrop. With the crowd thinner and calmer on the westward chase, it was easy to get in front of the Shenandoah Valley Limited for another angle of the Calf Pasture River in Goshen. As I've previously stated, I was bitten by the 611 bug, and bitten hard. So much so that I was heavily considering purchasing a ticket to ride Saturday's 2:30 p.m. departure, although some options did have to be weighed. Riding this afternoon meant I wouldn't have gotten back home until midnight, which unfortunately was not in the cards after 2 intense days of train chasing. That being said, I decided I'd chase the eastbound portion of the 2:30 run before calling it a trip, which meant this was to be my last time watching the Limited enter Goshen. I'm glad I made good use of the morning's westbound leg, happy to have seen the train at multiple locations along the route. After the train had cleared the river, I bounced back over to this morning's location on the industrial track in order to watch the Queen enter Victoria Station one final time. I'd railfanned this exact section of track back in February, as my efforts to find the Buckingham branch resulted in me chasing their local out of Stanton and into Stella Jones, the customer at the end of the spur here in Goshen. I was psyched to have found the BB back then, and never could have ever imagined that the next train I'd see on the Goshen spur was to be pulled by the Queen of Steam. The Buckingham branch and VMT had put on an incredible show for rail fans and passengers alike, and I was really happy to have had the chance to be part of the action. While I wasn't riding, I knew I needed to support the cause somehow, which led me to the merchandise tent at Victoria Station. On the other side of the tent sat the star of the show, where the railroad was happy to let everybody get up close with the J. Many people had come from far and wide to witness 611 in action this season, and it was really awesome to see so much love for VMT's program. Even the crew was enjoying themselves, showing off their iconic whistle to the eager crowd. It wasn't all fun and games though, as they still had to prep their engine for the afternoon's run. Part of that work meant manually dumping out the coal ash, residue from burning more than 19 tons of black diamonds, all before lunchtime. I also really enjoyed the opportunity to see the Queen's running gear up close, a true testament to the sheer size of the N&W product. Sitting raised on the roadbed, the driving wheels stood taller than I did. I also always like a look at the grease-covered valve gear, only this time with the famous J badged on the cylinder house next door. The inner workings of steam locomotives are extraordinarily fascinating. I know but a fraction of how it all works, and think it's quite impressive that the VMT team knows the engine like the back of their hand. One thing I know like the back of my hand is a good chili dog, and eating with a view like this made it taste even better. Some local restaurants had set up mobile venues at Victoria Station, and I will not soon forget the meal I had on this Goshen Saturday afternoon. What did appear to be forgotten were these two cabooses sitting adjacent to the industrial track. There was a barely identifiable Seaboard caboose and a much nicer Chessie bay window, which I decided would look good in the foreground as the 2:30 p.m. train left the station. The clock was quick to strike as Buckingham Branch GP40-2 number 7 proudly pulled the train towards the main line. The J-Class engines never operated during the Chessie era, although the 1980s would see 611's first return from retirement as she would operate numerous excursions for the newly formed Norfolk Southern. If you didn't know any better, you might have thought I traveled 40 years back in time to take this video. My imagination runs wild, pondering what the industry was like during the eras of steam and early dieselization, and I was more than happy to get as close an escape as I could for the weekend in the Shenandoah Valley. While 611 is behind enemy lines on the old Chessie system, it was truly spectacular to see her under steam. Every time I saw, smelt, or heard the engine, I cracked a smile. Intent on revenge from the day prior, I highly valued that missed shot on the Craigsville Hill and made a beeline once 611 had shoved past me in Goshen. I was set up with plenty of time to enjoy the region's bliss, although my mood was shifting to bittersweet as my time in Virginia drew to a close. Things were quick to look up as 611 roared through the mountains, approaching Craigsville. With the silver rods flying, I knew it was going to be a tall order to get in front of the train. Due to the immense chase party, I had only planned on seeing the train once more after Craigsville, and even that would be a stretch. Perhaps predictable, I wanted to end the weekend at my favorite spot in Hebron. Just like a rock star, I went out on a high note as the train screamed through the quiet settlement. What a way to end the trip. I was more than happy to have been able to run around the valley with the Queen of Steam for the weekend, and am quite excited to hear what her future rule in the Old Dominion may hold. All parties involved had gone through immense effort to make the Queen's fall season a reality, and I'm incredibly thankful to have been privy to the fun. Thanks for railfanning with me today. I hope you enjoyed chasing the Queen of Steam's new dominion in the Old Dominion as much as I did.